thanks a lot for joining us. Hope all is well. It's been a while.
Long time.
It's been a while since we chatted with you. And I think we were all pleasantly surprised that we heard you reached out to us to come on the show. It usually doesn't work that way. We're usually begging you. What's going on?
Well, here's the thing. There's only certain things I'll talk about, but this is one that I would talk about, the hiring of Dan Quinn. And so I figured that I'd reach out, and if you want to do it, we'll do it.
So let's not lead the witness. I don't want to color you. What are your thoughts about Dan Quinn taking over here as the head coach?
I don't think you can lead Charlie. He's got his own opinion.
Positive, good move. I've known Dan a long time. See, I knew him when he was in Seattle, and first of all, he's interviewed for a number of jobs. I've interviewed every team he's interviewed. To my knowledge, no one offered him a job, but he pulled himself out early in a number of these situations where he could have been offered a job, in my opinion. Okay, so he chose to come out. But I think this year he decided this is the time, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to take a job if I'm offered. So he stayed through the process all the way. So he could have had jobs, in my opinion, before this. He's a leader. He can bring the team together. He can rally them. The number one thing you look for in a head coach is leadership, not a guy that can fix the quarterback or call plays. All those things are important in the picture, okay? But there are some defensive coaches that are in the Hall of Fame, okay, and that will be in the Hall of Fame. So he's got the number one thing you look for. He's a leader. He can rally the troops. He can bring them together. He can build a culture. As anything, staff is the single most important thing you have to do. The negative can be when you're hired late. But I still think there's some guys out there, I'm not going to get into their names, that would be good offensive coordinator candidates. Now, his defensive coordinator that he signed on has had very high grades, and people have felt this guy can be a defensive coordinator.
Who's this, Witt? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of good reports on him. I've never talked to him. I don't know him, but I've had good reports on him the last few years. So that's a pretty good combination there. So I'm anxious to see what he does on the offensive side of the ball. That'll be something that we'll have to find out about.
Charlie, so you were a GM.
It is a good hire.
Charlie, you were a GM here in Washington. You were a GM and built a team in Houston. You mentioned that you want a leader and somebody who can build a culture. Isn't that what we said about Ron Rivera 4 years ago? What do you think went wrong?
I think that personnel decisions, staffing decisions, okay? So, I mean, you start with one, but you've got to – it follows down. Because then I said the single most important thing is going to hire a staff. So we have to see how Dan does in there. Now, it's interesting. He goes to Atlanta, and he builds a hell of an offensive staff there now when you think about it. Okay, led by Kyle Shanahan. He had LaFleur on the staff. The mistake he made, and he knows it, is he had to let Kyle go, but he shouldn't let anybody else go. Okay? So one of the things you have to watch here is, okay, who is the offensive coordinator and who's the second offensive coordinator? What do I mean by that? If you're any good, the first guy's gone, okay? So you want to have another guy available that you can bring up in the farm system. And what I do when I talk to these coaches and coach them, ideally you want the second guy, and I want to make sure I get this across clear, is a guy that may not become a head coach. In other words, he could have been a former head coach, okay? This is 100 years ago. When Bill Cowher took the Pittsburgh job, he hired a guy named Ron Earhart to be his offensive coordinator. He'd been a former head coach with the Patriots, excellent offensive coordinator, but he wasn't going to be a head coach again, so they weren't going to lose him. So sometimes your backup guy might be a guy that is a veteran guy that can be good but may not become a head coach. So that's the challenge when you're a defensive coach, is have the backup guy in there too. For example, Todd Bowles right now, he made a brilliant hire, okay, with his offensive coordinator, and now he's trying to get that next coordinator, and that can be a challenge. So, but that's not the reason not to hire a Dan Quinn.
Charlie, one of the things I actually respect about this Harris Peters regime and everybody is that they clearly aren't pandering to the public, right? They knew that Dan Quinn selling that to the public, and we don't know anything, would be kind of a meh reaction, right or wrong. And they know that, like, going in, and I actually think going in, maybe a guy like Ben Johnson, these hot, young, handsome offensive coordinators were the sexy pick. That's who everybody wanted. And we're getting some indications, and I'm not asking you to disparage anybody by any stretch, that maybe the interview didn't go great or whatever, it wasn't a great fit, but they didn't force it. They went with what they think is the best fit. Have you ever done that before where you've had a preconceived notion in the past where you were interviewing coaches and you thought this guy was going to be your guy, but after you met with him 2 or 3 times, it just wasn't a fit? Maybe the guy just didn't have that dynamic personality or just wasn't a fit. How many times has that happened to you before?
Well, I've only been through really 2 thorough coaching searches. Norv Turner met with Jack Kent Cook, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Cook hired him. And he didn't interview anybody else, okay, at that time, okay? And I'm not knocking Mr. Cook, that's for sure, okay? But in Houston, when we hired Dom Capers, we had a thorough search, and it seemed like a natural fit. He had started the Carolina team, and Dom did a good job. And it's hard to win with an expansion team when they change the rules in your first few years. And in hiring Gary Kubiak, went in with an open mind. We had interviewed him before. Didn't seem to be ready this time. He was a more veteran coach, and we came to a unanimous conclusion he should be our guy. So you do go in sometimes with preconceived notions, and it's because of your research. I mean, you research these guys thoroughly. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the guy comes in and he's better, or the staff will kill you. I always thought the most important part of the interview was the staffing, because when I interview teams, and I interview all these teams when they hire somebody, the most popular answer of why somebody doesn't get a job is the staff would have killed him. In other words, he didn't have a good staff. So you really got to, on the other side, you got to know who he's bringing in, and you got to have an opinion on them. That's to me is the single most important part of the interview. Okay, you can train a guy to have a good interview. Okay, and you can train him to say all the right things. But picking a staff is making a play call during a game. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that kind of separates people. That's my experience with the interview part of it. So,
Charlie, we're talking to Charley Casserly, used to be the GM of the Washington Redskins, then the Houston Texans, been with NFL Network for years, has had a bunch of jobs. All right, we were just getting in this debate about turning the franchise around. I want your opinion on the Commanders, where they are right now. They've got a ton of salary cap space. They have the number 2 pick in the draft, a lot of picks in the top 100. They just hired a head coach. We'll fill out the staff and all that stuff. Adam Peters. How long do you think realistically it takes to turn things around? I was pointing out an optimistic scenario that the NFC is weak. 9-8 teams got into the playoffs. And I'm just saying it's not a stretch. We've seen the Giants make a big jump 2 years ago with Daboll. We saw the Houston Texans make a jump into the playoffs this season. How long do you think realistically it should take for this Commanders team to turn things around?
Well, it's hard to say on that, okay? But I'll give you a stat, and then I'll work backwards. Now, this is a 20-year-old stat when we went to Houston. And, again, we're starting with nobody, okay? Mm-hmm. And I analyzed, the thing is 3 years. Everybody says 3 years. I said, okay, let's look at all the teams that in 3 years made the playoffs, okay? At the end of 3 years, 12 of their starters were there when they started. Okay, now that's a heck of a thing, okay? Right. So do we have 12 starters here that'll be there in 3 years, okay? I don't know about that, all right? Clearly, the quarterback, we can't say that he's the answer, okay? May be able to win with, but not because of, all right? Offensive line needs a lot of work. They got some skill position guys, so that's a positive, okay? The defense, who's their outside rushers, okay? That's a big question. I think the secondary needs work. The linebackers need work. So there's a lot of work here to be done, okay? Now, the good thing is the owner went through the 76ers, 9 wins a year, okay? So he understands the big picture and the patience, okay, on that part of it there. So that's a positive. He's been through a rebuild job. He said it, but he's done it. There's 2 different reasons now. I've sat with owners and say, hey, I can go through a rebuild, and I'm sitting there saying, you ain't sat through 16 of these messes now, okay, every Sunday. Okay, this guy sat through 80 of them or 70 of them or something like that. God bless him. So I think he's got the big picture part of it from the ownership, okay? So it's going to be a couple of years. And you could go through a San Francisco where you trade the franchise to go get a quarterback, and your 7th-round pick is the guy who saves you, too. So, those things can happen. But it's going to take time. I think the people will be patient, and I think the fans will be. So it's hard to say, and I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm just giving you history and facts on the thing.
Would you have liked to taken a job where you have the number 2 pick, all these picks in the top 100, and $70 or $80 million in cap space?
Sure, those are positive things. There's no question about it. Let me tell you about draft choices. Now, I did a 10-year study on draft choices. The second round, and here was the parameter. If you're a starter after 4 years, that's a successful pick. Whether you're a starter for that team or another, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, we took guys like Keenan McCardle and Frank Wycheck who starred with other teams. Okay, they couldn't make our team at that point, really. But so they were successful draft picks. Second round, 50%. It's a flip of a coin, 50 to 55%. A second-round pick is not a lock. A third-round pick is a 1-in-3 shot. A fourth-round pick is a 1-in-4 shot. So when you start talking about having a lot of picks, that puts it in a perspective now. Okay, that's a 10-year study. Okay, your draft is a 30% success rate overall for starters after 4 years. So you're going to need more than the draft. Okay, free agency. I'm sure what they're going to do is you highlight guys coming out of their first contract. If you get older guys, you put them on a 1-year contract, and you're going to have some stopgap guys. This is going to take a couple of years. I'm not familiar with the college quarterbacks, so I understand. I'm not sure. You know, Stroud, obviously, in hindsight, was a hell of a quarterback. He wasn't taken first. Yeah. So I know better than that to say you've got a guy there. So it's going to be a process, but all we can say is we got the right head coach, I believe, right now.
Charlie, one of the highlights of our career actually was when you gave us a tour of Redskins Park 20-some years ago. And you took us into our office, and we saw your draft board. And it was the first time that we saw an actual FUBAR list. And, yes, Charley Casserly had a FUBAR list, okay? And I loved it. I'm kind of joking, but I'm saying I'm not drafting a quarterback that likes to paint his nails and puts messages on there and everything. He'd be on my FUBAR list. Where are you on that?
I'm going to avoid the question. I'd have to know more about it than that.
You're not out simply because of nails.
I get where you're coming from, and it's a great radio comment. Okay, great radio comment. Okay, that one you're going to play all day. But we're dealing with a different generation now.
Yeah,
okay?
That's true.
But still, the single most important thing is how important is football to this guy? What's his study habits? What's his commitment to the game? Okay, and we'll go from there. I mean, Joe Namath. Were you born when he played?
No, barely.
Yeah, early
70s.
We were born in 70s. So we played about till 73 or something.
Never saw him play, but yeah, we were born.
Yeah. Well, this guy wore white shoes. Nobody wore white shoes. Okay, Johnny Unitas wore high top blacks.
Right.
Okay, this guy wore a mink coat. Who the hell wore a mink coat back then as a football player? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All they did is win the Super Bowl. So
right.
And he was a great player, and he played for Bear Bryant. So there's a combination too.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to know a little bit more about him. Okay. But let me say this: he's got some questions to answer. Okay.
Right. I agree with you, Charlie.
Hey, Charlie. Can't let you go before we ask you about the Super Bowl next week. Super Bowl 58 out in Vegas. Niners and, of course, the Chiefs. And, all the talk this year was, Bieniemy left and the offense struggled a little bit in Kansas City. Kelsey was having, not one of his greatest years, dropping some balls, and Mahomes didn't have that outside threat like he did when Tyreek was there. But they're back to the Super Bowl, because their defense, especially their secondary against the pass, is excellent. And then San Francisco, whose defense is starting to leak oil a little bit because they weren't getting to the quarterback like they usually do, and they've got some issues in the secondary too. But they've got a really good dynamic offense with Christian McCaffrey. So your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of just give you a breakdown of what things to look for. First of all, both teams are fast-starting teams, okay? They have great scripts. They execute great coming out of the block. Who wins the first quarter? Okay, who wins the first quarter? All right, the keys for San Francisco, you want to keep Mahomes in the pocket and get quick pressure on him. You want to force him to throw away from Kelsey, however you want to do that, okay? Because they're going to want to get the ball to Kelsey. Now, Kelsey's catching the ball when he's covered, okay? Yeah. The guy's playing like a man possessed, okay? And you can do a little editorial on that one, but that's really when you watch him, that's what's happening there. Kansas City has got to protect. We know that, especially against Bosa in the inside rush. and they've got to be able to get a running lane there for Pacheco. The other thing is, if you go to the other side, what you got to do is you got to get them in third down situations. Now, how do you do that? You stop the wide zone, the outside zone, and the cutback. So you got to be disciplined in your gaps. Don't get the guy to corner and play to the cutback. It means being disciplined in the defensive line. Then when you get him, you got to mix your coverages and blitz this guy. You can confuse Purdy. People have been able to do that. But you're going to have to confuse them with blitzes, et cetera, vary your coverages, but you got to keep them on that first and second down into a third down situation. Then the last thing is Deebo Samuel, okay? Mm-hmm. I don't know how you tackle this guy, okay?
Right.
But gang tackling. These guys make a lot of runs after catch. So gang tackling. And write this one down here. Okay, who do you want to go after in that secondary in San Francisco? The safeties, either Logan Ryans or Jair Brown, who's ever in there, and Aubrey Thomas at corner.
Right.
So those are some things to watch during the game.
Yeah. I think it's going to be really fun. I think McCaffrey's going to have a good game. I really do. I just think Kansas City's run defense wasn't spectacular this year, and I kind of question the Ravens why they didn't kind of run the ball a lot more, especially in the second half. Right.
Yep. No, that's a good question. Sure.
Yeah. So I think McCaffrey has a
game at the end.
But but can you imagine if Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, wins a Super Bowl?
Wasn't he going to let us draft Mr. Irrelevant years ago?
You did ponder it for half a second. Do you remember that, Charlie?
What's that now?
You had, I think you had the last. No, he was going to let us make his last 7th round pick. We were negotiating with
basically
you.
Mr. Irrelevant.
Right, okay.
Do you remember that? And you kind of thought about it for half a second.
Okay, I did. Well, we had a guy, actually, Matt Elliott was a center. He made our clean team on the thing. But here's an interesting thing. You know, they traded a bunch of picks to get Trey Lance, okay?
Yep.
Right.
And then they take Purdy at the end. So, God, you guys stink. You blew it. Joe Gibbs used to have a saying about that. He says, when we get a guy, when we blew a high pick, but, you know, we survived it with a late pick, he'd say, now that's scouting. Okay? It's true. Everybody's going to take those first-round picks. If you do mock drafts, probably 24 of the picks are the same picks. They just go to different people, okay? So it's really the same pool. But when you get into the 7th round, it's not the same pool, okay? There's hundreds of players there at that point. So there is something to be said, and I did tell this to San Francisco. I told them the Joe Gibbs story. You know, anybody could have taken Trey Lance, but not everybody takes Brock Purdy.
Right.
And coaches. Man, we know
and coaches them up.
Charlie, we got to run. Always a pleasure having you on.
That was good stuff.
Thanks so much for reaching out to us.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, bud.